The title of our webinar might be a little unfortunate in view of recent events, but really what we're trying to present here today is how you can use industry benchmarks in improving your workforce and analytics data. So I'm going to move forward here and go through a brief agenda. So what we're going to do today is talk a little bit about, first I'll give you just the briefest overview of who TrenData is and what we offer. And then I'm going to go through a four-step blueprint on how you might integrate and implement benchmarks into your workforce and analytics strategy. I call it a blueprint rather than a process. It doesn't necessarily have to be followed linearly, but it's a good methodology if you're not using benchmarks today and want to begin doing something. It's always good to have a blueprint or a process in place so we can start somewhere and move forward. So the four steps here, we're going to talk about, how you determine what to benchmark in your organization, where you get different sources of the information, then how you go about using it, and then once you've got everything in place, then how you begin to implement an overall strategy. Then we're going to talk a little bit about how a good technology can assist you in using benchmarks and lining them up against your internal data. And then we'll give a very brief demonstration of the TrenData's analytics solution, which will demonstrate how you use benchmarks to optimize the performance of your workforce. Then we'll move on to questions and other information. As I mentioned, I do have a colleague of mine on the system, Steve Parda. If you have any questions during the presentation, if you would chat them to Steve Parda, he will queue them up and we can answer them at the end of the presentation. So if you think of something as we're going through, just chat it to Steve, and Steve can either pass it on to me or ask the question at the end of the presentation. So let's move on. First, tell you a little bit about TrenData. We are a cloud-based platform company. We provide organizations the ability to generate advanced and predictive analytics by bringing together all of your HR software applications. We do that by establishing industry-specific HR metrics, trending them over time, and then giving you the ability to project into the future. The company is headquartered in Plano, Texas. I used to have to explain where that was about 20 years ago, but the city's grown a lot. But if you can see by the map here, we're just on the northern edge of Dallas. If you were to come here, you'd fly into DFW, Dallas Airport. The company was founded by myself and Mon Hamden. You might be familiar with Mon. He was the CEO and founder of HR Smart, one of the initial pioneers in the talent management industry with a full suite talent management offering that was eventually sold to a company called Deltek. Steve, myself, and many of the early employees at TrenData were employees at HR Smart. So we have very deep and lengthy knowledge of the HR marketplace and the HR software marketplace. So let's get right into things. Talk about why benchmarks are important. Well, I always like to start with kind of an informational overview, but that knowledge is power. The more information that you can have about not only yourself, but as to what you're up against, the better positioned you are going to be to succeed in the marketplace. So getting as much information as possible and moving forward. Benchmarking, just for a simple definition of it, is basically the ability to compare your business with the process and performance metrics of others in the industry. Could be your competitors, could be just others in the industry, anybody that you have to compete with either from a business standpoint or from an employee retention standpoint or gaining employees. The dimensions typically measured are performance metrics, quality, time, which is money, and hard money, which is cost. So benchmarking is comparing your metrics so as you can improve on quality, time, and cost. So as I said, I put together kind of a simple blueprint to kind of walk through what are the important things you need to do in both getting benchmark data, and then using it. So we'll talk a little bit about each one and some sub-bullets and dig into, how you do them. But it's basically a, 4-step process. You start out by determining what it is you want to benchmark, what is most important to your organization. Step 2 is then finding where can you get this industry information to benchmark against. Step 3 is then, once you have the information, how do you use it effectively to drive business and workforce performance? And then once you've gone through all the exercises of step 1, 2, and 3, then it's time to implement an overall strategy where you use the knowledge you've gained in the prior steps so that you can continually update and also improve your strategy to stay current and get ahead in business. So let's walk through each of these. Let's first start with step 1, determining, what it is you want to benchmark. So always first, which I like to point out, particularly to HR leaders, is when you're deciding what you want to benchmark, it's very important to coordinate with the business leaders. It's one thing to go out and determine you want to improve a certain metric like employee engagement, salary competitiveness, or whatever. But if it's not aligned with the CEO, CFO, and the people who are driving the business, you might not get the buy-in that you want, and you might spend a lot of time just developing things that you're not going to get any support with because others don't believe that they drive the business. So it's always important to get these people involved in determining what you're wanting to benchmark. After that, you have to go through the process of gathering all the internal information that you're going to benchmark against. Sometimes it's all on one system, but I'd say probably in the HR arena, you're going to be pulling data from a lot of different systems. We always quote Lisa Rowan here, who their IDC did a survey recently that said the typical large, medium to large HR organization has about an average of 23 HR-related systems. Once you include all the talent, the HRS, background checks, learning libraries, you got a lot of data in there, and often you got to pull that together even to get one simple metric. Then you got to identify opportunities to where you can apply your benchmarks, where it'll do the most good. Now you could have any upwards of 100 metrics that you're tracking within your organization, but I always recommend identifying the opportunities that can immediately translate into financial savings. That's how you'll get that buy-in from the rest of the organization. If you can tie how turnover is costing you dollars, zero in on that. If you can tie in that taking as long as it is to hire people is costing you dollars, zero in on that. But really zero in, first off, on those opportunities that you can tie to dollars. And get as focused as you can on these specific issues. What always, again, hits leaders hard is not necessarily when they're losing people in general, but when they're losing high performers. So I'd say, if you're looking at something, you could probably put a number to what it costs to lose a high performer versus what it costs to lose an average performer or someone that you were possibly looking at riffing anyway. So it's important to identify those opportunities, be specific, be granular, and tie them to dollars. Now, once you've decided what it is you want to benchmark, then you got to go outside and try and find sources of benchmarking data. Sometimes it's easy. The net has a lot of, the web has a lot of information out there that can tell you specific sources. But again, it's very important to identify, who those providers are that you're going to go after. Sometimes they're surveys that cost money. Sometimes there are things out on the web that are free. I do have a list of some targeted providers. I've gotten asked that a lot of times in doing presentations like this. So not the next slide, but the slide after that, I'm actually going to put up a list of providers in different areas that provide benchmarking data. But it's very important when you get this list of providers to make sure it's specific to you. Now that could be specific to your industry. An analyst in the energy field might not necessarily be as laterally transferable as an analyst in the banking field. So if you're just getting industry data on how much an analyst costs, you want to be pretty specific. You also might want to be able to look at things like position and geography. You know, you don't want just everybody in the banking industry averages. You might want, you know, different specific areas in there, and almost might be geography. You may not be afraid of certain competitors because they're more concentrated in a different part of the globe or the country than you are. You might be worried more specifically who's going to steal your talent in New Jersey or Colorado or something. So being able to narrow in on that list of providers and get as granular as possible is very important when picking sources of benchmarking data. Also, it's important to establish your internal averages first. One thing particularly growing companies tend to have a problem with is as you're going from a 25 to a 50 to 100, 200, 300 person company, the targeting of particularly compensation and other types of development tend to go on an individual basis. And then as you grow from a startup to you know, a large and growing concern, you look at your data and you find out, you know, it's really not very organized, it's not very fair. So you might find you have, you know, one position with salaries and training incentives all over the place. So it's good to maybe even put together bands for various positions. You know, what's the salary range for this position? What has to be achieved to be able to go into things like professional development? And once you've done that, then you start comparing it against those industry averages, and you can see where you're deficient. And that's where you can get to the point where you're collecting your information, having the averages, knowing what's going on in your company, and then comparing it against that industry data. So I did promise a list of various HR benchmarking sources. I probably, if you're really just getting going with benchmarking, probably the best place to start is SHRM. They have a benchmarking report section on their website. They publish a lot of free benchmarking data, a lot of good top-line data, like the average in time to fill a position, turnover, things like that. And whatever they don't have, they can kind of recommend areas where you can find it. Now, there's several more granular or detailed benchmarking providers out there. There's a number of good ones provided in the compensation area. Salary.com is one I've used very much in the past. They're very good. They actually went away for a while. The company was bought, and then they spun off again, so they're back out as a solo entity. Culpeper and Comparably are also a couple of good providers, and they're good if you're looking for something also cost-effective in the small to medium-sized companies. Willis Towers Watson and Mercer provide annual surveys. They tend to be a little more pricey and targeted at the higher end, and are often trying to sell their consulting services along with it, but you know, they provide a lot of good information. Recruiting has a lot of very specific data. There's an organization called ERE, which is pretty much to recruiting what SHRM is to the overall human resources area. You can go to the ERE site and find a lot of very good benchmarking data for recruiting in a number of different areas and also industries. A lot of providers that offer solutions also offer benchmarking data like Workable and HighRight. And then if you're looking for more kind of workforce data like turnover and more kind of you know, holistic type data, Compensation Force is actually one I follow a great deal for turnover. Of course, they also offer compensation data. There's a couple other groups. CEV Global is very big, but they publish a lot of benchmarking data every year. CIPD is a little like a SHRM out of the UK, but they do publish data that's not just UK specific for benchmarking. And then I also found that Bloomberg publishes a very good report every year, and it's free, where you can find a lot of good benchmarking data in there to use in your business. So that's just a couple of sources for benchmarking data. Getting back to the blueprint, you know, once you've identified the right sources, you want to start finding ways to use that data effectively and optimizing your business. So the first thing you want to do is to find, to get common findings in your data. So areas where there's a lot of concentration, you're noticing some trends, and I always emphasize keep them business related. So you're noticing a lot of turnover in a certain area, or you're noticing a lot of low engagement in certain areas. And what are the things that are affecting that? Could it be compensation? Could it be work-life balance? Could it be the ability to go into training? A lot of things. So you want to look for those common findings in the pattern and see if versus your industry benchmarks, well, maybe we're losing a lot of people because we're 20% below the average for these positions in our industry. And as I say, and then once you see those findings, then you look for those gaps that might be causing the trends that are hampering your business. And being able to visualize those, see them, is how you then go to the point of then correcting them. Where do you need improvement? And where can you target your efforts the most so you'll get the most improvement? You're always looking in a workforce for what can do the most in a cost-effective manner. And then also you want to be able to find out who your competition is. Now, it's not necessarily your competitions in business, but it might be. In the software industry, I remember about 15, 20 years ago, I was working for a company called 3Com, and there were two companies that always stole our people, Cisco and Synoptics. Synoptics eventually got bought by Northern Telecom, so we knew exactly who we were going against. I'd say it's probably a little broader right now, so it could be people in your industry. You got to keep an eye on them. Again, it could also be people in your geography. If you're a regional company, regional trucking company, and you're trying to keep drivers, and there's another competitor down the road, they might be more of a incentive to steal your people than somebody global like DHL or Federal Express. Or it just might be, HR is a good example. Often HR jobs are very horizontal and very transferable. So an HR person often can go to do their job somewhere else outside of the industry. So it might just be, who are the people around or offering that bigger, better deal that you have to compete with and that you're losing. So always be able to identify your competition, not from who's beating you in business, but really who's stealing your people. So finally, that brings us to the fourth step, which is now that you've accumulated all this data, how do you go about implementing an overall strategy? Well, the first is now that you know where you are, and now you know what the industry is doing, you have to start establishing goals. So the delta might be too big in the beginning to say we're going to bring our turnover down 10% and match the industry right away. I always find it's good to set immediate and long-term goals. The long-term goals are the ones that are really going to right your business, but often you need a quick victory. So it's very good to target something particular that you might be able to solve, with a quick fix of, as I say, doing something either with compensation or letting people work from home, offering more training, something to get you a quick win that can, bring the C-suite on board as to, hey, we need to really back this effort. But really, the whole idea of benchmarking, metrics, and analytics is to put together a long-term strategy for the health and growth of the business. So you got to be able to put processes in place to monitor that progress. You might have things that are working for a period of time, but suddenly they're not working because the industry has changed, a newer competitor moved down the street, or the work culture is, as more of your people are less baby boomer, they're more millennial, they want to work from home. You got to be able to monitor these progress and also constantly keep updating your benchmark. So what I put together last year or 3 years ago is no longer the standards in the industry. They've tightened a little bit. So you got to be able to keep monitoring that progress and evolving. So how can technology help? Well, basically everything we've talked about, makes the most sense when you put it into some kind of a system, because what a technology solution, a software solution could do is, first of all, help you visualize the situation or the problem. It's very tough to look at a 4,000 row spreadsheet and say, oh, there's the problem right there. No, you need to be able to crunch that into something that can tell you, here's where the gaps are, here's where your problems are, and this problem is only getting worse over time. It also allows you to drill down on the outliers. Often you may have only a gap in your pay in a certain area of the company, but it might not be throughout. So you might be just a particular area, whether it's a department or even under a particular manager or geography. Then being able to also align up events with your trends. As again, I pointed out earlier, you might be swimming along just great, your people are happy, you're paying the industry average, and then another large company enters the industry, enters your geography, and all of a sudden they throw things out of a whack. And it's good to be able to see, wow, things started getting worse once this happened. And then, of course, the real secret sauce is being able to model scenarios. Okay, well, the problem is this, and going forward, it's going to get even worse. Is it possible if I change this or change this, I can start bringing the problem back into focus? So a lot of different areas that I want to go into in the demonstration here, but we'll kind of move that around, and I'm going to jump right out of here and just make sure that everybody can still see my screen as I go through. Okay, so what you have right in front of you now is a standard metrics dashboard. TrenData, as I mentioned, we provide a solution that gives you metrics, allows you analytics and predictive. So right now you've got a customized dashboard that has the average time to fill an open position, number of employees within the company, the average number of reports per manager in the organization, tenure, average salary versus industry benchmarks, where you're hiring your best people from, and turnover. We're going to look at a few of these and how you can compare them to benchmarks. Also, if you have TrenData provides a number of analytics, both out of the box and custom. You may have ones that you like to track, but you don't necessarily need them on the dashboard, like how are you doing from the standpoint of what % of your population has successors. If you wanted to add that to the main dashboard, you can do that, and it would just place it somewhere on the dashboard, and then you can move things around if you want, if it's a more important dashboard. Now, this is giving you information that's being uploaded monthly, but you can have your information loaded real time through any number of systems. If you go to our data sources, we can bring data in pretty much from any system. It's just a sampling of ones that we've done in the past. And we also give you the ability to upload from just a standard CSV file. Companies find this very effective to kind of just get going on a system to see if it's something they can make use of. So I go back to the dashboard. This is data as of the latest snapshot, but I can also go back and see, what did things look like in September? And you can see I had more employees, a little shorter time to fill. And you can also look at it aggregated over time and such. But really what I wanted to go to is drill down into some of these metrics and show you how they can visualize them from the standpoint of your benchmarking. So let's look at time to fill. 90 days is an average time to fill an open position. Seems a little high. So let's look down and see what we've got here. So right now you can look at any of these metrics from a standpoint in percentages or actual values. Right now we can drill down by male and female. We can also drill down by department, which would probably be a better look for us right now. As we go through our leading departments, we can see the average time to fill in commercial banking, this is a financial organization, is about 86 days. It's about 98 days in consumer banking. Private wealth and department in securities is a little bit less. But what I can do down below here is actually look individually at my most recent hires and to see how are they comparing against some of the averages. Now, what I might want to do here is make this a little more specific. So let's just look for the time being at people in the US that we've hired. Okay. What I'm looking at right now is the individual employees that were hired. And it looks like I've hired about 9 people in the US recently. And here's the amount of time it took to fill those positions. First of all, looking at it versus our internal averages. So it took a little bit more in a few of these commercial banking positions, whereas a few of the others in consumer maybe we're a little less than our internal averages. So we might think we're doing okay when comparing it with internal averages, but what does it look like when we compare it to some of the industry averages? So I move that into my grid, and suddenly I'm looking at a time to fill in consumer banking, and I'll sort this by department, where it's telling me commercial banking, the average time to hire should be about half of what my averages are. And pretty much every position that I've hired in the last month is taking longer than my industry averages, with the exception of private wealth. So again, from a drill down standpoint, I might say, well, maybe I don't have to address anything in private wealth. That seems like it's doing okay. But some of these other areas, I really have to take a look at why it's taking me so long to hire in these particular areas. So having the ability to drill down from a top, you might be able to compare and see whether it's important to be able to do things globally or just in a certain area. Well, let's go over to an area that's very commonly benchmarked, which is salary. So right now I'm looking at my organization paying probably a little less than industry average, not much, but the industry average, just including executives and such, is about $6,000 less than the industry average. So let's drill down on that a little bit and look at, in currency dollars, how that's breaking down. Now, what I'm seeing here, again, is a breakdown by male and female. Males are actually a little bit closer to the average than females. And, one thing I get out of this, I can see I'm paying my males a little bit more than my females. That might be something just to look into internally to see if I've got something that's not only going to be a morale booster, but possibly a legality. So pretty important to look at that. Again, I can go and look at it by department, and it'll break out and show you which particular areas we're having, and it looks like pretty much across the board we're paying a little below the industry. And that might be something that's attributing to other factors such as turnover and employee engagement. And again, I can come down here, and if I wanted to look at the salaries on my managed columns, I can bring over current salary, and if I have industry average here, but I can pretty much bring over anything that I want and update my grid from a standpoint and just save it, and then I can look at the various averages here. But really, I want to make sure that this might be something that's causing a problem. It might be something within my organization that I know is a problem, but I'm trying to supplement it with quality of life and possibly professional development in bringing in less experienced people. Okay. Now, salary is something that you can affect. Time to fill and things like turnover are things that possibly you have to go and find a cure for. Let's go in and take a look at turnover. So as I can see, in the last month, I had about a 3.7% turnover, which would seem kind of high. So let me go in and look at my analytics and see how that's been tracking over the last couple of months. We've had a very big increase in turnover the last couple of months. How has that been going for the last couple of years? So if I go back, I can look at turnover for the last 5 years. And it's going to show me that I've got kind of bouncing around. Why are things so inconsistent? First of all, is that within industry bounds? I can use my events overlay here to do a couple of things. The first might be to just post, what are the industry averages? So I can post up there, in 2014 from the source compensation force, I can see that the average industry turnover was about 15%. I was not far off of that. Next year, however, it jumped to 23%, and I was, the industry average only jumped up to 15.7%. Well, one thing I can note is we had a merger that year with a company called Finantex, and maybe that's the reason for the spike. Once the next year, maybe when that settled down and I came back, the industry went up a little, a tightening job market, more candidates available, so turnover was a little bit higher. And I actually beat that average and came down a little bit, so that's good. But then in 2017, though, I had another spike, and history repeated itself because I do have another merger that took place. Now let's take a look at that on how it's affected just the individual year. So if I go back and look at 2017 as it moved into 2018, the merger was announced at the beginning of the year. And as you can see, after a little bit of time, yes, it did start to have an effect. So where I was at below 1% monthly turnover, which can translate into probably a very healthy, 12% a year, I was up to almost 4% by the end of the year. So obviously this merger is, among other things, might be having causing some concern amongst my workforce. So let's go into our predictive view and see if there's anything we can do based on our history that would actually allow me to change these things. So actually, based on that historical data, it's telling me I'm going to have a huge jump in turnover projecting forward based on the history I've garnered based on my last period of time when I had an acquisition. So are there any things I can do to kind of bring this back down? Well, as you can see, I've been showing you a lot of the individual views underneath the data. We also have a summary view, which you can then look and it'll bring up all of the relevant statistics and benchmarks that can relate to turnover. So, there's some that I can change, some that are a result of other factors. So let's see if we can do a little modeling here to bring that into perspective. So as I start the modeling, you'll know that 3 fields now become live in the future. Salary, percent of employee base working remotely, and the amount of high performers in professional development. I'll show you why that is important in a bit here. But first of all, let's just see. My projection tells me I'm going to have about a 5.5% turnover rate in February. What would happen if I gave a average $5,000 raise across the company? So I've got that 5.5%. If I put that raise in place, I've gone down to 5.3%. So I just spent a lot of money for very little return. So maybe that's not the best use of funds. So we'll reset that. I've also got a lot of employees telling me that they'd like to work from home, and it looks like the company has been pretty generous with that regards in the fact that we've got over 1/3 of our employees working from home. If I were to go and increase that by 10% to say 45%, I can see that does start to have a little bit of effect as turnover starts to peak and then starts going down over subsequent months. But again, using that drill down capability, who are the people that are sticking around and who are the people that this is affecting? So if I go in and drill down by performance, I can see that the people who like the working from home the most are the non-high performers. The high performers are still leaving, so there must be something else that's kind of driving them to leave the company if it's not necessarily salary or ability to work from home. Well, I go to my third changeable variable, and it's what percent of these high performers do I have in professional development? You can see I'm spending not much on my high performers as far as giving them career training and things that can help them progress in their career. Matter of fact, I'm trending downward in that. So if I go over to here and say if I have less than 7% of my high performers in professional development, what have I done historically, and what does the system tell me that if I go and increase that to say 15% and start putting more money into that? Aha! So we see that is something that in the past has rung true with my high performers and is something that if I apply now, the history of my data tells me will start having an effect. So a little bit on what you can do with benchmarking, using those benchmarking to project in your future, and using also the history of your data as to what happened when you strayed outside the benchmarks and how you can fix things. Of course, this is only one element, benchmarking, into an entire analytic strategy. But it's an important part to know not only what's going on within your company, but also what you're up against within the industry. So at this point, I'm going to go back to the presentation and open it up for questions. So I'm going to ask Steve, did we have any questions? I do have a few that looks like came in, and I'll address a few of them. I did get one question, are these slides available? Yes, the slides are available. I'm actually going to have a contact slide in the next, on the next page. So if you want, you can just send an email and we'll send you the slides with everything on it. Another question was, does our company provide consulting in a data analysis, not necessarily just to teach the TrenData solution? Yes, we do have a consulting department that can help you set up an analytics and a benchmarking strategy so that you can get going, regardless of what solution you have. We have domain experts and data scientists on staff that can work with you. Another question here is, how difficult is it to construct additional metrics? It's not very difficult. The way we constructed the original out-of-the-box metrics that we offer with the TrenData solution that you can get very easily is we did a survey of about 15,000 HR leaders and asked them what were the top 10 metrics that they wanted to track. And from that, we took the top 20, and that's how we built the out-of-the-box product. But yes, we can build additional metrics. Some people calculate turnover differently than we do. There might be some metrics that are specific to your company or industry, but as long as we have the data, it's very easy for us to construct a metric and put it on our dashboard. See, it looks like the final question I have is, can you pilot the system? Okay, well, good lead-in. Yes, we do offer free trials of our system. It's a no-charge trial. You would use it with the file upload. We wouldn't build any integrations in a trial period, but generally, if you can do an output from your HRIS system, you'll probably get 70% of the data you need to at least begin using the system and see if it can apply any advantage to your organization. It doesn't provide the predictive portion. We actually come in and build that post, so it does just do advanced analytics. But if you have enough historical data, it's very easy to build some projecting and some trends for you. It doesn't require a contract. You don't have to sign anything. You just have to contact us. We will provide you free support for the duration of the trial. You can either email us at marketing@trendata.com, and you don't really need the promotional code for this one. Or if you want right now, you can chat to Steve Parda, who is on the system right now, and just send him your email address and yes, that you want to do a trial, and we'll be able to get you going right away. But it's a good way to both be able to trial the system. We'll give you some good information. We can even give you some basic salary benchmarks that we use. I won't tell you where we got them from, but they're good. I don't want to endorse anybody over anybody else. We try to stay neutral, but we can provide some initial salary benchmarks for you as well if you want to do some initial benchmarking and training. So no charge. Just go ahead and chat to Steve if you would like to begin the trial, or send an email to the below address. And I think with that, we'll conclude today's webinar. I would like to thank everybody for showing up and spending time with us. I hope it was worthwhile. If you go to our website, TrenData.com, under the resources section, there's an events tab, and that is where you can find information on any of our future webinars. And also, there'll be a recording of this webinar that we'll post probably in a day or two once we've completed the recording and perfected it. So if there are no other questions or anything, I would like to thank everybody for their time, and hope to speak to you again in the future. Thank you very much.